Hello there, and welcome back to the Film Score Podcast. As always, this is your host, Nick, and today actually marks the Season 4 finale. So, to commemorate the occasion, my guest today is Daniel Hart. Now, you might be familiar with Daniel's work on a number of projects, things like A Ghost Story, The Green Knight, some a little more mainstream as well, like Pete's Dragon, and then, of course, so far, the first 2 seasons of Interview with the Vampire, which, as of early June, was renewed for a third season. So, Daniel and I primarily focus our discussion on Interview, fitting, I know, and then naturally break out from there. I really like both of the scores for these 2 seasons, especially the second. As you'll hear from the conversation, it created an environment to do more in a number of different ways. Very cool piece. Now, you can find out more about Daniel on his social media. You can do the same for me. Like I said, final episode of season 4, not a bad 1-2 punch of Daniel and Viggo Mortensen. Still getting off the high of that one. And you'll be hearing from me here and there, sporadic solo episodes, maybe an interview or two. We'll see. Always seems to happen. And then I'll be back sometime in the fall. It's very up in the air right now. But until then, sit back and enjoy it. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today. How have you been?
I have a 4-month-old baby. I've been better rested, but I've never been quite this happy.
Good. And if we hear some crying in the background and you have to run out really quick, I'll know why and I won't blame you.
Thank you. It's probably not gonna happen, but now that I've said that, I should probably knock on some wood.
Yeah, I was gonna say if 4-month-olds are anything, they're certainly predictable, right?
Exactly. Yes, he's predictable Joe.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Obviously, season 2 of Interview with the Vampire, just the first episode as of right now came out. I don't know what it was, 3 weeks ago maybe, with like a rolling weekly release, which now feels like so antiquated with everything dropping at once, and it's really nice to see. But as that happens, as the show comes out with each episode, and your score's been out for I think a couple weeks already now, do you pay attention to the reaction of viewers and fans as that comes about?
There's a group of fans of the show on Twitter that are probably somewhere between, on average, it's between like 20 to 50 people who interact with me there. And I get something from at least half those people like every week. Every week there's a new episode. There was a lot of talking back and forth when the soundtrack was released, and I think this most recent episode, which is episode 5, people wanted to talk about more than others for whatever reasons. But there's always some kind of interaction. I think the soundtrack for this season is so much more involved than it was for the first season. There's a lot more music in the second season, but it's also doing a lot of, I don't know, more specific interaction with what's happening in scenes. And so some people who are super fans of the show, after the soundtrack was released, felt like the soundtrack itself was full of spoilers, which I hadn't really considered. But I think if you know the books at all, then it probably is full of spoilers. It tells you a little bit about which things from the books might be included based on the music and based on the titles of the tracks, which I tried to keep somewhat ambiguous, but they're also related to the scenes in which that music plays, so it's not totally ambiguous. And then even beyond that, there are some specific melodic themes that these fans of the show understand are related to specific characters or specific relationships. And so when those themes show up, they're asking me like, what does that mean? And I try not to say things that I shouldn't say. But I'm not gonna lie to anybody either, I guess.
I mean, it raises a few questions. One, it's something that I does drive me crazy sometimes. I don't know if you saw the Claire Denis film High Life that with Robert Pattinson that came out. I don't know when it was, 6 years ago maybe.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
High Life.
One of the cues in that score, the name of the cue is literally like X character's death, and I was like, Stuart, I think it was Stuart Staples. I was like, Stuart, leave a little ambiguity there. But at the same time, I think that's the risk you run of listening, looking into the score release before you've seen it. Because even if you have the titles ambiguous, so often the score, the development of themes is telling a story or a narrative, and sometimes when you know what those themes represent, you can spoil it for yourself just musically.
AMC was asking for us to have the score ready to be released when the first episode aired, or within a couple days after that.
Mm.
And because of the nature of the work schedule around television and only a finite amount of time in the world, that ended up not being possible. We released the soundtrack, I think, when the second episode aired, or not long after the second episode aired. It feels to me like maybe we should have waited even longer. But I don't know. I never had to consider this before, or I never have, even if I should have considered this before.
Well, I was gonna say it's an interesting project for you because obviously Anne Rice's novels very well known, very famous. The I haven't looked at the viewership of the show itself, but I mean it always seems to me like a fairly popular show. And then you look at a lot of the other projects that you've worked on, even ones that I think among more film or film music people like Ghost Story or The Green Knight still aren't these more mass appeal projects. So
Yeah,
it's
most
an
people have not seen them.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Unless you're on film Twitter, you recognize that most people have not seen those films.
exactly.
Um, so with that sort of change, with having fans of the series reaching out to you, and a lot of people that get into music for film and TV aren't getting into it for the glory and the acclaim and the fans. Has that taken some getting used to for you?
I guess so. I started in the band world. I've had my own band. I played in other people's bands. I toured full time for about 6 or 7 years. And that was only about, not only, that was a lot of that was about playing for people who were fans of the music of the bands that I
Mm.
was playing in. It reminds me of that, but it is the most passionate fan base for something that I've ever worked on in the TV or film worlds. And it is different than my usual interactions around stuff. Like I have people reach out to me from time to time and talk about how much they loved A Ghost Story. And I have people reach out to me from time to time and talk about how much they loved The Green Knight, and especially people in the film worlds, just like you're saying. But Vampire, because the books have been around this long, it's had such a long time now for people to get to know, especially these two
Mm.
main vampires, Louis and Lestat. They've had such a long time to get to know these characters, and there are things about each of them that are so lovable and hateable that it's hard to not have strong feelings about them one way or another, you know? And then I think that makes it hard to not have strong feelings about the show that's being made.
Mm.
The people that are reaching out to me are people who love it. I imagine there are people who are also unhappy with it because of the ways in which it might be different from the books, the ways in which it's different from their own feelings about these characters. But people care about these characters, and everyone in A Ghost Story was a brand new character that nobody had ever met before, that nobody had ever heard of. So there's, I think, a certain responsibility that I feel to be true, to pay attention to the characters that Anne Rice created. That comes with some previous experience, some previous baggage that I don't usually have to think about because I don't usually work on franchise films or sequels of kinds. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I mean, I guess the Green Knight is a pre-existing IP, but I don't know how many people are fans of,
It is.
super fans of that
Yeah.
story from whenever it was, 1500 years ago.
Had we made the Green Knight film in England in the 1500s, I might have had a lot of people reaching out to me on Stone Tablet Twitter.
So obviously that's a feeling that you have now, having this sort of responsibility, but is that something that was always in your mind going back to let's say the first day you were brought on to season one?
No, I don't think so, because I had never read the books. So I didn't have that relationship to these characters.
Hmm.
And I don't think it was clear to me at that point exactly how much or how important these characters were to people who are fans of these books and or fans of the movie that was made in the 90s. So, no, I didn't understand it, and I was just approaching it like any other project that I work on, where my work is always character based anyway. So it's not that much of a leap for me. I'm always trying to care about the characters, and I'm always trying to write music that's true to the experience the characters are having on screen, and that's true to everything happening on screen, their experiences and the experience of the world around them. But no, I didn't understand how important these characters were,
Hmm.
historically speaking.
Talking about being true to the characters. Obviously, a series is different than a movie. You get a movie, it's, let's say 90 minutes, exists as, in most instances, it exists as a standalone thing. So what you're seeing is kind of the entirety of what will be shown of the characters. A series, here it's, 8 episode seasons that can continue to extend, and sometimes what happens in the future is going to kind of shed more light on why a character is a certain way. So, is there a difference in how you're approaching what's true for a character in film or TV? And I mean, I guess in general, how are you approaching it and trying to determine that?
I don't think I'm trying differently for one or the other. I haven't dissected it in that way. I think the character work is the same either way. We're developing characters in their worlds. I'm trying to write music that's true to their experience. I'm watching how the camera moves. I'm listening to the timbre of people's voices
Hmm.
to know which instruments to use when they're speaking and which ones to avoid so that they don't compete. I'm looking at how much light there is, how fast the camera pans. Yeah, all those things, all those kinds of things, and thinking about character development, all those kinds of things feel the same to me from one to the other. The biggest difference for me from film to television is that the story is so much longer in television to tell. I mean, unless it's like a sitcom where you're starting over with a new story every
Mm-hmm.
episode. But with this one, where it's like long form narrative, the story's so much longer, and so you can't have Lestat's theme playing every single time he's on camera, as in otherwise you just have one melody for so much of a show, especially when these two main characters are on screen so much. So it has to be because there's more, we're telling a longer story with more time involved. More music has to be written overall, but then more themes have to be developed per character. I'm sure that's true. Yeah, because there's so much more happening. Yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest difference.
Hmm. And with that, then, what goes into the decision of whether to, if Lestat, for instance, is on screen, the decision to play his theme versus something else?
Something else. Who else is on screen with him? He and Louis have a love theme for their relationship that doesn't always play when they're on screen together either. Sometimes they're loving each other. A lot of times they're not loving each other. Then there are other characters too with which she interacts. There's Claudia. Sometimes we get her theme when it's her and Lestat on screen. Sometimes it's a combination of the two of their themes, or sometimes it's neither, because the specific scene needs something else. It needs something non-melodic because there's so much dialogue, or it
Hmm.
needs something more terrifying because what's happening on screen is very scary. The orchestrator for season 2, his name is Kevin Koska. I think it's fair to say he's one of the best orchestrators in Hollywood working today. He's certainly one of the most knowledgeable about orchestration in film going back decades. And we've worked together before. I really enjoy his work, but also just talking to him. We talk a lot in between work. And he, on the first thing we ever worked on together, which was Pete's Dragon, Disney children's action adventure film in 2016, he said to me one day, he said, the movie tells us everything we need to know about what music to write. All the clues are there. If you're a detective and this is the thing you're trying to solve is which music belongs in this scene, the scene tells you everything. Everything's happening on screen that you need to know, especially if it's a well-written, well-acted, well-directed scene, but really any scene will tell you everything you need to know. I always think about that whenever I am going into a scene to score it, and I'm just looking at everything happening on camera, both character-wise and otherwise, looking for those clues. In the end, that's what determines what I write. In that process, I'm asking myself, does their theme belong here? Does his theme belong here? If yes, what's the instrumentation for it? If no, is there another theme here? Is there no theme here? Is it just underscore?
Interesting. And how has the search for those clues embedded in the film or the show changed over time as you've done more and more projects?
Well, gosh, the hope would be that I get better at it. I would hope that's the biggest change, is that I'm better than when I started. I know more about music for film and TV. I know more about music in general. I've spent so much time studying music my whole life, but especially since I started working in music for film and television. Because before that, I was mainly writing songs and then playing other people's songs on tour. And that always felt to me like a more personal study, a study of myself and my relationship to the world. That's what I was studying in order to write songs. But now I spend so much time looking at other people's music, especially at other people's sheet music, both for film music and in the classical world, in the like European classical world. I'm looking there to learn how other people have done it before me, make sure I am doing the best version of what could be done. So yeah, how has it changed? Yeah, hopefully for the better. I think I'm trying to write more complex arrangements these days. Sometimes that is not needed for a scene, and so I don't do it. But if there's an opportunity, there's a piece of music in Interview with the Vampire Season 2 called Paris Sucks. And it's the opening of the second episode, and the showrunner, Roland Jones, he had Gershwin in mind when he wrote the scene. And he told me that. He was like, hey, I'm thinking about Gershwin. And so I started thinking about Gershwin. And that piece that I wrote, Paris Sucks, definitely feels like someone who listened to a lot of Gershwin wrote it, when I listened to it anyway. And Gershwin's music is very complex, especially rhythmically complex, melodically accessible, rhythmically complex, harmonically complex, and more complex than I think a lot of scenes in film and television being made today allows for. There's just often not enough room for the music to be complex, and it doesn't need to be. But there was that room in that scene for me to write something complex, and so I tried to do that, and I probably would not have written that piece for that scene 5 years ago.
And that's, I can't remember, I think that might be the third or fourth track on the score release, and that's one that
Sounds right.
always catches my attention whenever it comes on, because it's not that it sticks out in a bad way of like, why is this here, but it's just so distinct. And I think
It is.
it's one of the fun aspects of listening to the two scores, is that the show is obviously traversing through and jumping through time and decades and locations, and so I imagine that gives you a lot of room to toy around with different ideas rather than being in one place one time.
There's part of the story in the third episode of this season, which takes place in 18th century Paris. And that episode, along with many episodes in this season, revolves around a theater troupe in Paris made up of vampires. They're performing music in 18th century Paris that accompanies their plays. You know, there's like a pit orchestra that accompanies their plays. Well, they're not going to be playing Gershwin, and they're not going to be playing Nine Inch Nails either. So, yeah, I wrote music that is supposed to sound like end of the 18th century classical music that would have been played by a pit orchestra in France. And so I was thinking of Mozart. I was thinking of Schubert, Desailly. Yeah, so there's that. And then there's some Gershwin-esque things happening. And then and then we spend a fair amount of time in this show back in Dubai in what's supposed to be 2023 or 2024. Certainly don't need 18th century music for 2024 Dubai. Yeah, a lot of jumping around. More than the first season, for sure. The novels that Anne wrote do a lot of time jumping, too. But this second season did way more time jumping than the first season did. Yeah, really a chance for me to take a little trip down memory lane as far as musical history goes and explore music from many different time periods. A real joy and a big challenge to try and get it right.
Well, maybe Bridgerton will do a classical version of some Nine Inch Nails songs here.
Yeah.
A romantic version of Closer or something.
Yeah, if they haven't already, they should. That would be a great song to do classically.
But I imagine as well that there has to be a significant element of work that goes into trying to make it feel period appropriate, especially when it's diegetic music like in The Pit. I'm going to drop this every moment I possibly can. I interviewed Viggo Mortensen last week about his film The Dead Don't Die.
Wow.
And yeah, trust me, I was shocked the whole time. I was like, I'm being pranked right now. But that film also has some diegetic live music performances in pieces, and that was something that he had mentioned as well. And so I'm curious if you could expand a little upon that, including maybe with the Green Knight too, where you're creating music in these distinct periods, and so how much is going into trying to create music that is maybe instrumentally, melodically, etc., period appropriate.
The Green Knight I did more research for than any project I've ever worked on. And I think that's still true, even with the amount of historical music that was needed for Interview with the Vampire Season 2. I think The Green Knight still takes the cake for the amount of research that I did into music of Europe in the 1500s. Getting it period appropriate to the degree that it could be was important to me. I did also spend a lot of time reading and learning about Middle English, especially Middle English poetry, because musically, having grown up in the Episcopal Church, which is the American version of the Church of England, musically, there's a lot from my childhood that I could draw upon as source material, because there's a lot of music in a more traditional Episcopal Church service, which has roots in medieval European music, and especially because it's the Church of England, medieval British music. So that was a place that I could go to, at least to start, was a lot of stuff that I sung in church as a child. Middle English, though, I think I probably had to read part of the Canterbury Tales in AP English senior year in high school, like some other people did, but otherwise no experience with Middle English. So taking the time to learn Middle English enough to be able to write song lyrics in Middle English for the songs that were written happening on screen in The Green Knight. I did spend a lot of time doing that and studying Middle English poetry to look at the rhymes being made and the syntax, grammar. Interview with a Vampire, we had a lot of music taking place in the Paris of 1930s and 1940s. A lot of on-stage music. This theater troupe made up of vampires has a live band for their performances. Raul and the showrunner told me ahead of time, let's make it 3 people. That's all basically we can afford. And we think that's all that this theater troupe would have been able to afford as well. You know, they weren't raking in the dough in war-torn and then just barely post-war Paris in the 1940s. That brings its own limitations and gives me information about what kind of music I can write. It's only 3 people. What kind of instruments would they have had in a theater at the time, et cetera, et cetera. These things I'm trying to think about to make it feel true to that. And then listening to music from that time period must be so much easier to do this research now than it would have been if I was working on these projects in the 1980s because of the internet. Yeah, a lot of time listening to music from different time periods to try and be true to what happened at that time. For both this and The Green Knight, I listened to a lot of medieval music. I listened to a lot of recorder music because I wanted to include recorders. In the Green Knight score that I listened to, recording music of the Renaissance and medieval times, but I also listened to modern recording music because I wanted to see what was possible, what people were doing with it now. And we tried to include some of that in The Green Knight because the extended techniques being used by people writing for recorders now make some sounds that really work well for a film that delves into haunting horror, ghosts, monsters, a little bit like The Green Knight does.
Very cool. Very cool. And I think there's got to be a balance there of having something that's purely 100% music that could have existed in the time and adding additional techniques, instruments, textures, what have you, to like not just make it modern, but sort of maximize the effect that you could have.
There's a piece of music in Interview Season 2 called Annika. It's a piece of music that starts with the onstage band for the Théâtre de Vampire. So it starts with just 3 instruments. And then the orchestra takes it over by the end of the piece. This is a piece of music which plays while Santiago, the lead actor, vampire, is seducing someone on stage. There just would not have been a way for the 3 musicians to do enough, musically speaking, to express everything that needed to be expressed musically in that scene by the end of it, the way that it builds as the action builds on stage. It wouldn't have been enough. And so we let the orchestra take over about halfway through the piece. Other instruments start joining. And so it's bridging this world between diegetic and score that was necessary for this scene. And a lot of fun to make. I don't know that I've done it that often before. It's often just one or the other. Either it's what's happening on screen or it's not. But I like this idea of being able to go back and forth, and having the music be true to the scene doesn't necessarily mean it has to be 100% true to what's happening diegetically.
I think it's always a fun technique. It does have a nice impact. I want to jump back to something that you'd mentioned several minutes ago, talking about the difference earlier in your career, writing songs and touring and playing in bands, compared to working on film and TV, and how, and correct me if I'm misparaphrasing, but how in those earlier days it required, I think, a bit more introspection or a bit more looking internally rather than now where you're looking at the picture as well.
Yes.
How much or how important is it to still have some of you coming out into the music that you're making for a show or for a film?
There's an interview with Philip Glass where the interviewer asks Philip Glass a question that's some version of like, most of the music that you have written that's out in the world is very easily identifiable as music written by Philip Glass. He has a specific sound. You know, you have a specific sound, Philip Glass. Do you ever try to write music that doesn't necessarily sound like Philip Glass? And Philip Glass says, yes, I do. Every time. And I always fail. And I think that it doesn't matter what I'm trying to write or not write. I'm always in there. it's always coming from my brain. When it's film and TV music, I'm fulfilling the needs of people on screen, and I'm fulfilling the desires of the showrunner, the director, the producers, the studio. I'm trying to listen to what everybody is looking for on screen and off. So there are other people's visions and other people's ideas involved in what I'm making. But I don't think there's any way to completely divorce myself from the music being written. So I feel like I don't have to worry about whether I'm in there or not. It's just going to be there. And I'm just there no matter what. And so I don't think about it very much these days. I think as we look forward to season 3 of Interview with the Vampire, where there will be some songs involved, and they're not supposed to be songs written by me, they're supposed to be songs written by a character, that I would try to get myself out of there and try to be thinking of the character when I'm doing it. It's also true, there's a song in season 2 called I Don't Like Windows When They're Closed. And in theory, this was written by a vampire playwright with the house band of this theater troupe in Paris in the 1940s. And I did try to make it not so much like me, and especially not like the songs that I would have written for my band in 2018. But I'm sure we could find a song that I've written in the past for my band that in some way feels sort of like I Don't Like Windows When They're Closed. And I'm sure we could find a song that's going to sound kind of like the songs that I'll write for season 3, just because I'm involved. I can't ever get away from myself.
Well, one point in your favor, hearing a lot of those songs left me with the question of I don't know whether these are original or whether Daniel has just found like songs that existed 90 years ago and modernized them a little bit.
Well, thank you. I think I am also probably more of a chameleon than Philip Glass is, I would say. I've spent more time writing for film and television than I think Philip Glass has. I haven't actually counted it up. I feel like the majority of his work out in the world is in the classical field, and he has done plenty of especially film music. But percentage-wise, I think I've done more film and TV stuff than him, where I am fulfilling other people's visions, and that often means writing in styles outside of what I might do if I was just writing music to write it. And so I think in being a chameleon, I do have a desire to try and embody music from other times, or music written by other people, characters or real people, that maybe comes more naturally to me than it would to, I don't know, Jimmy Page, who is one of the best rock guitarists of all time. But if it's guitar being played by Jimmy Page, you probably could figure out, oh, that's definitely Jimmy Page's guitar. That's not Django Reinhardt. That's Jimmy Page.
All I heard in that answer is you saying that you're better than Philip Glass and Jimmy Page.
Yes, that's definitely what I said. I am way better than Philip Glass at music.
Good. I can't wait to pull this out of context and create a great clickbait clip.
Dear God. I love Philip Glass so much. I loved his answer to that interview too. It's really endearing. I find his music incredibly inspiring.
I do. My wife doesn't mind, but I always appreciate. So we're in Chicago, we're in the Midwest. We do a lot of driving. I always appreciate when we got the radio on and I'm flipping the stations and like a Philip Glass opera's on, and I'll leave it on for like 2 hours, and not everyone wants to listen to Philip Glass for that long, but she bears with me.
When I was in college, Philip Glass came to my school and he did a performance of I think it's the 1930s film of Beauty and the Beast. Is a silent film, so maybe it's earlier than that. A French film, Beauty and the Beast, Bella Labette, silent film, and then he live scored it with a band. Probably one of the first times I've ever really thought about scoring to film is watching him do it. It was very impressive. The music that he was doing didn't feel like 1920s or 1930s French films. It felt very modern in the late 90s. It felt very much of that time and very much like Philip Glass, that kind of sort of very, very beautiful minimalism
Hmm.
that he often writes in. It was something I'd never seen before. Yeah, really, it stayed with me. Obviously, I'm telling you about it now. Stayed with me.
That's cool. That's
Yeah,
very cool.
yeah.
Obviously, that was like a formative experience for you, but is that sort of thing something that you'd ever be interested in doing yourself? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it looked like so much fun. It was hard for me to tell if everything was through composed or if he was doing any improvising in the moment. It was probably it must have been through composed. Yeah, he's doing it to yeah. I think it was through composed. Either way, that sounds like a lot of fun to me. Whether it's written beforehand or you're just improvising to what's happening on screen with an ensemble. Yeah, I don't remember how many people were in his band. It feels like it was 4 or 5 people, maybe. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. We've talked about from time to time the record label that puts out most of my film and TV music is Milan Records, and
mm,
JC from Milan and I have talked from time to time about doing like a live score event for a ghost story we talked about at the time, or possibly for The Green Knight. We're looking for a project where people cared about it enough that there would be people who would want to see that kind of thing. And
yeah,
it hasn't happened yet. But this kind of thing that we're talking about now, the thing that Philip Glass did, where it is in fact not a film that he'd already scored, it was just an old film, sounds like even more fun to me, actually, than just recreating something live that I've already written to picture. I did a charity event last year here in LA where I wrote music with Natalie Holt, the
mm,
composer for Loki and Obi-Wan and many other fantastic things. Natalie and I wrote a score together for like a 12-minute clip of a silent film starring Buster Keaton that was performed here in town at a charity event with a small orchestra. And that was, I suppose, like a sort of like a version of what I saw with Philip Glass. And so much fun, very intricate. Buster Keaton, Natalie and I decided to write music which followed all of the jokes happening on screen. And
mm.
the film that we did a clip from is called Sherlock Jr. And I think it still holds the record for the most number of gags ever in a film. So the music is like really cartoonish in how much it's commenting on what's happening on screen. A lot of slapstick, a lot of screwball. Yeah, a huge challenge, but a lot of fun.
But I do think there's maybe increasing interest, or at least the interest is out there. Like, I know the composer Christopher Young, was working on a project, I want to say maybe doing a rescoring of Nosferatu. And then last year, maybe this year as well, Mark Jenkin, I don't know if you saw Ennis Main, he directed and scored it. It's this Cornish indie art house horror film, and he kind of did tours of like live scorings of it,
Cool.
and Eiko Ishibashi did something somewhat similar for Evil Does Not Exist.
Yeah.
A different version of it. I can't remember the name, but I think there's more experimentation and interest in this type of thing, and so I always think composers can underestimate how much interest there might be out there.
Yeah.
But
it's
but
it's
that
it's
said,
it's difficult
if you
to
try it and if you try it and no one shows up, this is not my fault.
if I try it and no one shows up, I'm gonna blame you, Nick. It's all on you now.
That's when I'm gonna release that clickbait clip. So don't try me.
All right.
So, all right, one other thing. I know we're running low on time, and this is like a complete non sequitur in a lot of ways. So you probably didn't read this yet because I think it came out a couple hours ago. There was an article on Slashfilm about the more recent lack of themes in film, really, but more so like classical capital R romantic melodic themes.
Totally.
And then you listen to something like Interview with the Vampire, or really a lot of your scores. There's a lot of themes, there's a lot of melody. You don't have to comment on the meat of that because I'll assume you didn't read it.
I haven't read it yet. No.
Yeah, but I was wondering if more broadly you had any thoughts on that sort of more recent change in music for film in particular.
I see it for sure. Yeah, music for film and television seems to be, generally speaking, veering further away from the majority of music for film and television, which has existed up to this point, which has been melodically driven, a lot of it based in the Romantic era of Western classical music, or somewhere around there, Romantic, Impressionistic, early 20th century. Most of film music seems to live in that space, historically speaking. It's we seem to be going away from that. I'm not sure exactly why. I probably, because of the films that I loved as a kid, want that. Probably because my initial training as a musician is as a violinist, and it is, more than anything else, it is a melodic instrument. Look at the number of violin concertos or works for solo violin or featured violin as a solo instrument that have been written over time versus the number of works written for bassoon. And you can see why a violinist, someone who trained as a violinist, would think melodically. And so I think because of those two things, because of movies like Back to the Future, which was really, really important to me as a kid, and especially musically, and then because of my training, I still think melodically. I want that. I write like that. That's my default when I'm scoring, is to think in those ways. I've worked on projects where the director or the powers that be didn't want that in certain scenes, or they didn't want it overall. And so I have done other things as well. And I want to write music that's true to the scene, and I want to write music that fulfills the vision of the director or whoever's vision it is that we're trying to fulfill. That's my job, but it's also the thing I want to do. I want it to be this thing that they're making. I want it to feel like the thing that they're trying to achieve. So I'm happy to do it, but my heart lies in melodic music, and I guess I'm lucky that someone like Roland Jones, who's in charge of Interview with the Vampire, also wants that for the most part. Where it's possible in the storytelling, that's what he's after. He wants big melodies. I like writing big melodies. It comes pretty naturally to me. So I probably try to seek out projects that allow for that. It's fewer than it used to be, probably. I mean, there's so much more stuff being made, so is it actually fewer than it used to be?
It's hard to say.
Maybe not, but feels like it. It's less than before.
Just got me thinking, you talking about violin, the amount of violin concertos, with the amount of research you did with recorder. Could put together a recorder concerto?
Should I put together a recorder concerto? I'll just do that in my copious spare time.
Well, Daniel, I appreciate the time. I know you're busy, so thanks for taking the time out to talk to me. It was a pleasure.
That was great to talk to you, Nick. Yeah, really enjoyed it.